Hello, my name is Aaron, and I'm going to be discussing the sermon Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. If we were to catalog all of the sermons in American history that have been extremely important, extremely influential, I think Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God is almost certainly in the top three um, of sermons that have created a sea of change. It was really the both the highlight and an early forerunner to the idea of brimstone preaching. Um, or fire and brimstone preaching. And I think that it, especially when we look at the way in which we preach today, is largely a reaction against that sort of that sort of preaching. And yet, at the same point in time, when I've read the sermon, I've not heard it delivered. But when I've read that sermon, I would argue that a lot of the times we're reacting against the idea of the sermon rather than the content of the sermon itself, or we're reacting against what we've heard about it rather than it. Um, because I do think that he goes too far at times. But for the most part, it's a sermon that's really holding up the sovereignty of God, the power of God, the majesty of God. Um, and rather than discussing it, not rather than discussing the love of God, because the love of God is apparent in the sermon. But if we see God as largely due to paradox, anytime that we preach, anytime that we talk about God, you're going to choose one side or the other, and you kind of give lip service to the side that you're ignoring. So if the choice is to talk about God's love or God's righteousness, right? In a coherent, cohesive sermon, you have to focus on one aspect and leave the other aspect where we'll talk about it a little bit less. And so Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God focuses very heavily on God's righteousness and on God's sovereignty rather than, and kind of ignores a little bit God's love and God's tenderness, and God's relationality. And I think that that has to be okay, because I think that we've reacted so strongly against that sort of sermon type that we've lost a little bit of that righteousness. And I would caution us as a church, us as a body of believers, to be aware that both aspects are true. So absolutely, you cannot live on a diet of sinners in the hands of an angry God. But at the same point in time, I also don't think that you can live on a diet of fluffy grandfather God who just wants to give you whatever you need. And I think that that's more of what we see, at least in the churches that I've been exposed to. Thank you.